Yo, what's going on, Titan Clan? It is your fully awake, boy, King Titan X here, back with another video, and yeah, like with the editing for the last one, I kind of goofed up in the beginning. I apologize for that. I even got I got a comment mentioning like how I ended up having the intro be played twice. Yeah, I done goofed up on that part, but I'm not even gonna explain why. I need to know I was tired that day. Anyways, enough stalling. I just had to say one thing. Credits to Neptune for helping with the process of making this, and be sure to check her channel out. I will leave the link to her channel in the description below. She's also got her own fair amount of things that she's working on, and if you guys want to help her in the process, you can DM her on Discord.
何としてでも勝つ。何としてでも生きる。
Now, when we had last left off, Naofumi ended up defeating Motoyasu in a duel. As an effect of this duel, Motoyasu ended up having to pay Naofumi his wages for the month. Naofumi would also go a bit above and take his wages for the next month as well, on top of having the king give him a little extra money as well, due to the fact that the king decided to delay the announcement for the declaration of who ended up winning the battle. He was even turning a blind eye when his own daughter decided to play dirty and try to interfere. Naofumi would have called out the king for his many foul plays throughout the match, and would force him to pay that extra fee. The king would begrudgingly agree and give Naofumi a little extra money on top of the amount that he had just made from that duel. Needless to say, Naofumi and this party would be eating tonight. Now, Naofumi would use some of this money in order to pay for getting Ren's and Wendy's seals removed. The reason for them wanting to get theirs removed was because of in fact, they wanted to have free will with no real consequences. After getting their seals removed, they would honestly be extremely happy. Naofumi would test it out and give them a command or two. The two girls would refuse to listen to Naofumi though. They would be disobedient and there would actually be no consequence here. The seals no longer took any effect on them, confirming that the seal removal process was a success. Although they would cheer about this, Naofumi would end up rolling his eyes in response and request that they still listen to him, at least whenever it came on to something important, such as when it came on to fighting enemies. Especially while in the middle of another wave, there could be many lives lost, and he doesn't feel like wanting to have that to have blood on his hands because of the fact that he had some disobedient party members. The two would understand where Naofumi was coming from and agree to this. It was the least they could do after Naofumi did free them from the slave trader, and on top of that, he treated them with respect throughout the whole process. He genuinely seemed like a nice person that they could get along with a long run, so of course they would end up agreeing to these terms. With this newfound freedom, Ren and Wendy would actually begin to express more of their personalities to Naofumi and Raftalia though. Naofumi would also be handed an egg with a chance of it either becoming a dragon or Falolio before they ended up leaving the trader's shop. Naofumi and his party would make their way to Ryut village the people would begin to praise Naofumi for helping them out during the last wave. He was the only cardinal hero who even bothered to try and protect their village after all. As a form of thanks, the magic shop owner and medicine shop owner would actually hand them books, these books being on how to do compounds and how to do magic. Naofumi would also get his magic assessed. He would end up finding out that he had an unusual amount of magical capabilities. Although his base seemed to be support and healing magic, it seemed as if he had gone through a couple of changes somehow, which allowed him to have more magical capabilities. Like, for example, he could probably learn how to do fire magic, earth magic, these sorts of magic. It just seemed kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, this did intrigue Naofumi. These other forms of magic also did not come off as natural, according to the magic shop owner. They could not necessarily explain why, though. They assumed that this might be because of Naofumi being one of the cardinal heroes, though. Why they have access to all these different forms of magic as well. Naofumi, hearing this, would assume that this probably came from his predator skill. While in Ryut village, Naofumi would be surprised to actually see the egg hatch so soon, though. He would find that it was actually a Filolio that hatched. This interested Naofumi, but his curiosity would be halted for a moment due to Motoyasu. The blonde would have arrived in the village not too long later with his own troop. He would announce himself as the new lord of this town. He would also pass on a heavy toll for the people that Naofumi would end up being upset over. He was aware of the living conditions of the people here. He knew the value of their money as well. So, hearing this, he found that this was unacceptable, really. He found this to be outrageous. He knew that the people could not be expected to pay so much, so he would call out Motoyasu for the outrageous toll. This would have angered the blonde, though. After his loss to Naofumi back at the king's court, Motoyasu would attempt to have a rematch in the form of a race. He would even set up the terms for this race, in where if Naofumi won, he would end up relinquishing his rights to the village over to Naofumi. That is, of course, if he won. He would make that very clear. Naofumi would agree immediately, though, surprising Motoyasu. Naofumi would have actually had much more confidence in his abilities here, thanks to the predator skill. Naofumi would mount on to Philo, and they would race against Motoyasu on his dragon. They would manage to win even with the interference from Melty and Melrimwake soldiers. The village elder would provide Naofumi with a carriage and a commercial bill of passage afterwards. Naofumi would end up starting his own peddling business afterwards. He would also make sure that Philo got her own set of clothes that would adjust to both of her forms, the Filolio form and her more humanoid form. Since he refused to walk around with a girl that could just end up ripping her clothes at any moment, and him having to constantly replace them as well. It was either that or she walk around naked, and he refused that option as well. He immediately decided against that option. He also ended up having to deal with another sort of conflict, this being between Philo and Wendy. Naofumi would be in the middle of learning more advanced magic, and compounding while the two were bickering. Raphtalia would be annoyed with the bickering between the two girls, while she would simply laugh from all of this banter. Ren would mention how Raphtalia early on even acted pretty similar to Philo, and where they seemed to be incredibly bratty. Raphtalia would be offended and try to deny this, but Ren would simply have her arms over her head and just sigh. She would be the one to even try to communicate with Philo, though, actually sort of understanding where the girl was coming from, and where she's not trying to be mean or anything. It's just the fact that it's within her nature to just be against dragons. During their journeys, Ren would begin to show a change in hair color, with it showing streaks of purple. Ren would have also gone on to develop fully into her adult form here, this being, of course, in that she ended up growing to have a rather muscular physique. Well, muscular for a female, that is, but still remain on the more slim side. Wendy's arms would have grown scales, and she'd stay on the more petite side, although she would develop sharper teeth and her hair would grow longer alongside having claws. During one of the bickering sessions between Wendy and Philo, though, Raphtalia would attempt to actually break it up, only to get knocked out by the two angry females. Ren would just... It's like this. Ren, seeing this, would try to cover her mouth. She would have ended up bursting out laughing if she didn't. She was trying to hold back a giggle, but it was incredibly strenuous on her part. Naofumi would have gotten sick of their arguing, though, after seeing what they ended up doing to Raphtalia, and used one of his shields to chain the two up. He would tell them to quit arguing already, and save that energy for sparring or fighting enemies if they didn't want to suffer any consequences. The two would be forced to listen and stop their arguing for now. This didn't stop them from still giving each other the side eye, angry glances at each other, that sort. Ren would look at Naofumi kind of disappointed, though, in how he decided to deal with the whole situation. Ren would point out how this wasn't going to really help their situation much. In fact, it was probably going to make everything worse. Ren would bring up how it's part of their DNA to simply hate each other, and that Naofumi was kind of in the wrong for even going through with getting a lottery egg in the first place, due to the fact that it was going to be a 50-50 chance of it being either a Filolio or a dragon, and he ended up getting a Filolio in the end. Naofumi would sigh and admit that he did screw up a little there. He could admit where he's wrong, but it's not like he can control time or anything. He could not necessarily just redo some things or basically just go back and return the egg or anything, have it be unhatched, and then just be able to say, oh, I don't want this egg anymore, give it back to the slave trader. No. Even if he could probably send her back to the slave trader in their current state, he would mention how incredibly messed up that would be. He would refuse to go back on his decision and simply return Philo. Instead, they would have to just make it work for now. Maybe in the end, they can maybe form a Zoro and Sanji relationship, in where these two not necessarily hated each other, but well, that didn't necessarily stop them from arguing with each other. They would argue with each other but still have respect at the end of the day. still being able to work together in some instances. That's what Naofumi would be hoping for in the end. If they could probably work together when it really mattered, Naofumi could deal with her arguing for now. He didn't feel like putting a muzzle on them after all. Ren would point out another thing though, once he mentioned the muzzle. She would mention how she would simply remove their muzzles anyway, or, well, the two of them could probably remove their own muzzles if Naofumi didn't restrict them or anything. Naofumi would laugh a little and mention how he would just cut her claws if she attempted to, if she actually attempted to try and undo their muzzles. Ren would laugh hearing this and go on to state the advantages against Naofumi, them being a scythe, her having magic, debatably better stats. Oh, and well, she had a free will. She was all for free will at the end of the day. That's why she was so willing to just have these two argue all the time. It was them expressing their free will at the very end of the day. Naofumi would point out his advantages against her though, these being his higher level, his greater amount of versatility, and his skill, Predator, which he could probably end up using against her if he really had to. The two would stare down each other, with Ren eventually backing off, simply saying touche. During their journeys, Naofumi would find himself having to clean up after the other heroes' messes. They were still under the mindset of everything being a game for some reason. Motoyasu ended up accidentally creating a bioplant infestation in one of the villages, and Ren would be forced to use her scythe as a gardening tool. This felt demeaning to her. Ren ended up, the sword hero Ren ended up slaying a dragon in another village, but they forgot one thing. They forgot to do the cleanup work. Naofumi and his party would be forced to fend off against the corpse of the dragon. Naofumi would use as many abilities as possible, even taking on the aspects of other creatures he absorbed before, in order to boost his physical capabilities. Naofumi and his party would finally defeat the dragon, with Philo attempting to chow down on some of the dragon due to pent-up aggression. Wendy and Ren would laugh at the sight of this. In the process, Philo would find the dragon's core, and she would walk over to Wendy, simply quite innocently, until she would grab onto the dragon girl's face with the dragon core in her other hand and begin to shove it down Wendy's throat. Naofumi would be alarmed seeing this, and he would quickly grab onto Philo, pulling the girl back. Wendy would be disgusted at Philo for what she did and begin to talk down to her. All of a sudden, her voice would switch to a more demonic voice, but 1 second later, it would immediately switch back. Everyone would look at Wendy strangely. They would be surprised hearing this after all and realize that they may need to end up getting her checked out. They don't know what could have been in that dragon core, for crying out loud. The party would head back to Melrose Mike in order to get her checked out, while also meeting a girl by the name of Melty along the way. Wendy would grow a mischievous smile on her face when seeing the many Philolials around the area and suggest to Ren something that they could probably do. Maybe they could grab a bite to eat around here, seeing the amount of Philolials here. After all, it's going to be a while when they're basically just going with Naofumi and food rations are starting to diminish after all, and it's going to be a long way back to Melbourne Mike, so may as well eat right now and just get it over with. Philo would mention how it would be wrong to consume those of his species, but, well, there would be one thing that Wendy would end up mentioning, this being what ended up happening back at the mountain with Philo attempting to eat a dragon, which, well, Wendy actually is. She's a dragon demi-human, but a dragon nonetheless. And on top of that, she force-fed her a dragon's core, basically having it to where she ended up committing an act of cannibalism, you could say. And so in all honesty, she could be justified in where she could probably just eat these Philolials. After all, it's an eye for an eye in this world. Philo would pout and cover her eyes, not wanting to see such brutality. Naofumi wouldn't partake in the equivalent of chicken in this world either. Raftalia would join in on the consumption of the Philolials, seeing it as a good opportunity to regain his strength. Melty would be disgusted though, but also she would realize that the three didn't necessarily do anything wrong. They were simply surviving off of the land's resources. Melty would join Naofumi's group, who were willing to lead her to Mellow Mike's castle town, with a reward in mind as a form of exchange. Once they reached, Naofumi would try using the holy water on Wendy in hopes of it being able to get rid of any negative effects the consumption of the dragon core had on her. Afterwards, the group would be confronted by Motoyasu. Motoyasu would notice Naofumi's party once again and question where he was finding all these cute girls, not recognizing the girls due to their physical changes, despite being only by a small amount. Wendy would hear this and request to neuter him. Philo would question what that even meant. Naofumi wouldn't answer Philo though. Instead, he would focus his attention on Wendy, stating that the simp is, well, a cardinal hero. He's a cardinal hero at the end of the day, and because of this fact, he's still important. So no, she cannot necessarily neuter him. Naofumi would go on to also state that the one with purple hair was just Ren, just a bit more fit, and, well, she had a bit of a change in color in her hair. Philo, the little blonde girl, was, well, a Philolial, the one that he ended up racing against and losing to back at Ryut Village. The other two had hardly any changes, so he should have been able to recognize Wendy and Raftalia immediately. But just in case, well, Naofumi would point out that this one was also Raftalia and the one with horns was, well, Wendy. Motoyasu would not believe Naofumi when it came on to Ren and Philo though. He also would go on to mention how these girls had some sort of shift in personality compared to the last time he had met them. At least, the last time he could recognize them anyway. And Naofumi would state that this was probably because of them getting rid of their seals. That's why their mannerisms were just so much more different from the last couple of times. Ren would even walk up to Motoyasu, proving it, but the blonde boy would be a bit distracted by something else. He would be caught staring at another area, and Ren would realize what he was staring at. She would slap him away, and Motoyasu would stand back up, angry at what she did to him. He would show a bit of aggression afterward, wanting to fight the group now. Melty would use her royal authority in order to force Motoyasu to back down. Naofumi would be shocked to find out Melty was part of the royal family all this time and be less inclined to help her moving forward. Once the third wave started, Naofumi's good deeds would cause for Ake's team and Wrestler to fight alongside him. Ren and Wendy would actually prove to be the most capable out of his team though. They were able to fight off several monsters rather easily, leaving the other heroes in awe. They would be wondering what sort of training regimen Naofumi had these girls under. Naofumi would simply go on to state that he wasn't really giving them much of a training regimen. Rather, he just got rid of their skills while Raftalia wanted to just keep her own as a sign of loyalty to Naofumi. The ones that got their crests removed ended up progressing at a much more rapid rate as a result. Ren also developed a big mouth though, and the same could be said for Wendy, although hers was more directed toward Philo most of the time. He would admit that last one was kind of his fault for not taking into account the relationship between Philolials and dragons though, but what was done was done. Motoyasu would ask if he could maybe borrow Ren one day, and he would get slammed down to the ground in response. Again, he recovered quickly, still upset with what Ren did to him, and go deal with the other enemies for now. Naofumi's assistance would eventually be needed by the other heroes though, due to them trying to fight off the Soul Eater. They were showing signs of being unable to keep up with the difficulty curve, while Naofumi was able to effortlessly take care of the Soul Eater. Once Naofumi managed to defeat the Soul Eater and impress the other heroes, he would use Predator in order to absorb the creature, amping up his own abilities even more, giving him access to, well, more abilities on top of that, more magic, more properties to mimic as well. But after this, a mysterious woman by the name of Glass would arrive and challenge Naofumi to a fight. This fight being to the death. This woman would be found to be rather strong. She was able to survive so many of Naofumi's heavy-hitting attacks, but she would show signs of wear and tear though. She would show some signs of injury, although Naofumi would understand that he was still not doing as much as he would have imagined against her. He was imagining that these attacks would be able to one-shot her, or at least show much more signs of damage. But no, for some reason, she was much stronger than that. She was only able to take a little amount of damage overall. It's like she had an HP of 100 and he was only able to cut down about like maybe 20, 30 overall. It was showing signs of damage, but he was still going to need to train more if he wanted to actually defeat her one day. She would be forced to flee once the timer for the wave ran out though. After the wave, the king would request to see the heroes and their parties. The king focused solely on Naofumi though. He demanded to know Naofumi's source of power after hearing what Naofumi was capable of doing during the last wave. Naofumi would smirk hearing this and make his own demand in exchange, this being that the king had to bow down to Naofumi. The king would be outraged by hearing this and refused to oblige to Naofumi's offer. He would go on to even eject Naofumi from the castle. Naofumi's team would simply go back to the carriage and be off on their way to do another journey. Melty would run up to catch up to the team though, and would request that Naofumi trying to at least talk with the king one more time, this time being on more proper terms. Her guardians would approach the group though and aim their weapons at each one of them, including Melty herself, which confused the purple-haired girl. It was as if they were really trying to kill her. Naofumi would be forced to rescue the girl though. He would grab onto her sweater and pull her onto the carriage. They would immediately be on their way, leaving the capital. Naofumi would be labeled as a fugitive for kidnapping Princess Melty though. Naofumi's party would be pursued by the soldiers until the queen's shadows ended up helping the group evade the soldiers. The shadows would also be the ones to convince Naofumi in order to change directions. The soldiers wouldn't be the only ones tracking Naofumi down though. You see, the other cardinal heroes, they had found out what Naofumi did, and now they were also searching for him. And that is how we end part 2, people. Hopefully this gets a decent traction. Anyways, it's your boy King Ty Next signing out. You guys don't really know the deal. Hit that like button, subscribe, and if you have any friends who are interested in what if some, maybe send them a link. Maybe share this video, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, like, comment, share, and subscribe. That's basically how it goes. It's your boy King Ty Next out. Peace.